Is up there, everybody? We are back with another Halo Flashpoint video. And today I'm going to be covering the FAQ and errata that Mantic brought out for Halo Flashpoint. This came out around January 3rd or January 2nd, maybe even January 4th, depending on where you live. I actually already did this video, but the audio for my first one got all messed up, so I'm having to re-record it. So the first one was like a live reaction, but at this point I've already read it. So I'm just gonna kind of go through it again and explain a little bit of why some of these things were changed and, maybe some other things that we could see changed in the future. So first up, I'll just kind of read through it as we go. So rules commentary updated 3rd of January 2025. Certain questions or topics that pop up are a little too complicated to just resolve by FAQ, and those topics will be dealt with by a more in-depth reply. Rules commentary sections are to be taken as official answers. So I don't know if that is referring to what they have already brought out, or if that's going to refer to another document that may be released later in the future. Either way, it just seems like this is how they're going to answer most rules questions going forward, which is absolutely fine. But with that done, we'll go down to the first thing they have talked about. Diagonal movement and orthogonal movement. Diagonal movement and orthogonal routing. So if you see this little picture, this diagram they have here, and you've spent any amount of time on the Discord or even maybe the Reddit, the Facebook, you have learnt to despise and hate this. Not really, but this example, like it took, maybe 10 days of talking and arguing and different, replies and different rulings from several different people. Initially, it was ruled as a 1 movement, but I guess meant to have taken back to the drawing table, and they've since updated to be 2 movement. As you can see, it goes left 1, then 1 up, and then that's how you get there. So I'll go through how they've actually come to this conclusion. So when working out if you can move diagonally upwards to an adjacent cube, you should first ascertain if the cube you start in could reach that location directly with a single cube of movement. If there are no walls forming part of the starting cube that connects to the target cube with an edge or corner or a ladder or object to climb contained in the current cube, then you cannot reach it directly. You must use a cube of movement to first move to a different adjacent cube that could enable the model to reach the target destination. All normal movement rules would apply, so picking up items, weapons, or fighting an enemy would still be considered. Then move to the destination cube from the intermediate cube. This means, as the example shown here, a model would need a minimum of 2 speed in their appropriate stat to advance or sprint onto the bridge shown. As the starting cube has no walls which connect to the platform, it must move to one of the cubes with a grey-blue wall, which then provide a valid diagonal route with a wall to climb to complete the action. So primarily, the main thing they have changed is that when you start a climb, you must have an edge, a corner, a ladder, or an object to climb, complete that climb. And you must start on a solid floor. For this scenario they've given, obviously you can't get to the number 2 spot from where the blue model is currently standing because there's nothing in between the blue model and the number 2 spot. So instead of doing that, the model must make a move 1 to the left or 1 to the right. And then from there, it can check once again, is there a corner they can climb? And yes, there's a corner of each block or box. And because there's a corner, they can climb up and go up. So it's 1 to the left. And then from there, they can move diagonally up. So 2 movement. That is a good change. It also covers a few different issues, not just this one. So it would cover things like two tall towers standing adjacent to each other with a spot in the middle. I might put up a diagram here. I might not. But what you might have been able to do before is you might have just been able to go straight over that gap because the old rule said you could move over gaps without floors. And by climbing, you could just climb, quote unquote, from there to there. No issues at all. But now with this, it says you have to have a solid floor to begin with. So you have to go all the way down, have a solid floor, and then go all the way back up. So that's a change for the better. Now down to the FAQ part, or I guess the second part. So this part said it was put out on the 2nd of January, but the whole thing was put out on the 3rd. So it looks like they're going to do a first part, and then they updated it for the second part later. So the second, or the part that was released on the 2nd January, ostensively. Can a model move up to the top of a height 2 building using 2 cubes of movement? Yes, you can move up to your full speed stat so long as you have a wall or object to climb, and a solid floor to start and end your movement action on. So that is an FAQ, but it's actually just something that most people aren't really aware of. The game seemingly implies that you need to climb buildings 1 cube at a time, as in you climb up 1 step, then climb up a 2nd step, then climb up a 3rd step, but that isn't the case at all. So it turns out you can just climb straight vertically up buildings, no problems whatsoever. I guess all the Spartans have climbing gear, and so do the elites and whatever. So as it says, yes, you can climb straight up 2 tall, 3 tall, You could even get up a 4 tall if you had like a thruster pack or a model with a higher move stat. It does make tactical positioning and like map building a bit more difficult because basically any model can climb anything at any time, but that is what they've gone with, so that's what we get. So does rapid fire also trigger ESD? No, rapid fire does not trigger ESD as it does not score hits. It either succeeds or fails. So what that means is rapid fire isn't really a traditional shoot action. It's more like a test you take to see if you successfully pin a model plus remove a shield. Since it isn't a normal shoot action, it does not trigger ESD because it is not a normal shoot action that triggers any hits. It just is a test that you must beat. And so it's pretty clear. No, ESD does not trigger, and nor does any similar abilities. Can I use a snapshot special order against a model using the active camo item? You may not target the enemy model with a ranged weapon since you do not have line of sight to it. However, weapons which target a cube may be used to target the cube you and the enemy model are currently occupying. So that's also pretty clear. Active camo cannot be snapshotted because when you activate the snapshot shoot action requires line of sight to a model. You do not have line of sight to the active camo model, so you cannot shoot them. That can also be used as a ruling for if a model set up into a cube on, say, I'll put up another diagram, but say there's kind of like a half wall intersecting a cube halfway across, but it's still considered one cube because it doesn't cut the whole cube in half. If I set up a model on the opposite side of this wall and your model's on that side of the wall, you wouldn't be able to snapshot me because you do not have line of sight to me. So once again, it's just a good clarifier. How does fast transition interact with evade? So fast transition states that you must declare the target of both weapons, then resolve the dice rolls for the first weapon completely. This would include any reactions that may occur from that initial shoot action. If you are then eligible to shoot your second weapon, resolve the dice rolls for this second shoot action. So once again, it's pretty clear, because fast transition is 2 separate shoot actions, you fully resolve your first shoot action for activating your second shoot action. Because there's a gap between those two things, that gives the enemy model a chance to evade out of the way, and then you might not be able to shoot the second weapon. And once again, it's pretty clear. I guess the reason that was brought up because people were saying because you're making 2 shoot actions, do you get to shoot both weapons before the evade triggers? And they made it clear that you do not. If a frag/implosion weapon hits a cube with an energy shield barrier, how are the energy shield barrier shields allocated? The attack affects all models simultaneously, and every model has the benefit of the energy shield barrier. The ASB will then deplete by the highest amount required by those models. So basically, if you've got, say, 2 enemies and 1 friend in a model and it gets hit with a frag full explosion, and that frag full explosion triggers into like 4 successes. Because the energy shield barrier gives every model 2 shields, all models will gain the benefit of energy shield, plus 2. And then once all that's done, the energy shield barrier will be depleted by 2 for each model, meaning 6, and it would be depleted. So that's pretty clear, and it's a good clarifier. How do energy shield barriers interact with sticky keywords? If the attacking player rolls 2 successes with a weapon with a sticky keyword, the chosen model have all their personal energy shield depleted and may not use energy shield barrier against this attack. Other models in the shield may use personal energy shields and the energy shield barrier against frag hits. So I don't know if the rulebook necessarily agrees with how that's written, but that's how they've resolved it, so that's how we're going to have to play it. So like it says, if you use a sticky grenade against a model that has the benefit of energy shield barrier, and you get your sticky keyword successful, then not only does the model lose its own energy shields, it also loses the benefit of the energy shield barrier. And, like I said, that was just another issue people brought up, and it's just good to get a clarifier. What happens when a model is knocked back into a cube at capacity? Page 28, scatter. Models that are forced into a cube at capacity will remain where they are, if on the same level, or scatter lower, if it has already fallen to a lower level. So what this is kind of implying is that the knockback keyword and the scatter keyword are similar in that they share the same restrictions. Once again, I don't know if the rulebook necessarily agrees with how Mantic have worded it, but since it's Mantic, we have to agree with it. And I do agree with what they've said, but I just wish the rulebook also said the same thing, because if you go to the knockback keyword, I've got a nice poorly scanned book here. It says knockback, etc., etc. It has no restriction on placing models in a cube. Anyway, it just says refer to the forced movement, and then you go up the forced movement up here somewhere. It also, if you read through that, does not give any restrictions on the amount of models that can be placed in a cube. The only thing that gives restrictions on the amount of models that can be placed in a cube is the scatter keyword, or the scatter rule. And the scatter rule is not equal to the knockback rule, because they're 2 separate entities in the book. They don't necessarily relate to each other. In fact, at the very bottom, effects from an enemy shoot action, e.g. death, explosive, pinning, knockback, take place before evade moves. So it's already kind of implying that knockback is already separate to scatter, is what I gather from that little tidbit there. So I agree with the ruling, but I just wish they'd kind of had the book reflected. What is the current turn sequence to start my game? Number 1, set up the battlefield. Number 2, place items, weapon drop, markers. Number 3, roll for recon if used. Number 4, deploy. Number 5, perform recon effects if used. Number 6, perform scout moves. Number 7, roll for weapon drops. Number 8, roll command dice. Number 9, begin game. So that is pretty good, because originally in the book, you had quite a few different things that just said at the start of the game, or at the start of the round, or, any combination of those things. And so it wasn't very clear at what order you did those things at the start of each phase, or round, or whatever you want to call it. So because they've got this here, not only can you apply this to the first turn, you could also apply this to each round, which is good to have. When a model carrying a picked up weapon dies, can another model pick up that weapon from the respawn point on their activation? So yes, the weapon is placed onto a respawn point as per the rules, and any model that respawns on your team can equip it on respawn. So this must be just some confusion with this rule. So the respawn rule, I believe, is pretty clear in that it doesn't say the model gets the weapon, it just says place the weapon. I'll just find it here. Respawn. It just says that the respawning, that the weapon is placed on a respawn marker, if you read through here. So because it says that, the model doesn't necessarily have to have the weapon. It's just placed on a respawn marker. A different respawn model may then respawn on that marker, and because they respawned on that marker, they get to have the weapon. So with that, you could kind of switch weapons if you chose to do so. Can I add command dice to my move action to increase it? No. Command dice are an entirely separate action and cannot be chained onto another action. They still follow all the rules applicable to their actions. So I do feel like this is, once again, a little bit of confusion with how people are reading the rules. So when you take a free action, that is a separate instance of an action happening to your normal action. So say you take a 2-speed advance forward. You can't claim that's a 3-speed advance with the move dice. It is a 2-speed advance, and then at the end of that 2-speed advance, you then spend a free action to move one more cube. And that's impactful for things such as like climbing buildings, because with the new climbing rules and the old climbing rules, when you climb a building, you have to climb that building in one single action. So if you want to climb up a 3-tall cube, I'll once again probably put a diagram here, but if you want to climb up a 3-tall cube and you want to do it as a 2-speed advance, you'd only go 1, 2, and then you say, oh, well, I want to use a move dice to move that extra cube. You can't do that because that's a separate action. Even though it's a free action, it's still a separate action. So the first action still has to be fully resolved. And because you've ended in the cube with no floor, the gravity rule will take effect and you'll fall back down and you'll be pinned, and that'll be the end of your activation. But what's interesting to note is that the thruster pack item does add +1/+1 to movement, or just +1 to any advance or sprint you do, which means you could do that with a thruster pack if you chose to do so, because as you can see, it says add it to the model's stats. It's not a separate action you're taking. And that is the end of the official Mantic FAQ and errata for January 3rd. I do feel like this has answered a few of the more pressing issues. The diagonal movement and orthogonal routing is great. I do really enjoy that take. I think most of the other ones, I agree with every single one they put here. I just wish for at least some of them that the rulebook they have written also corresponded to the FAQ, or they maybe gave some explanation for why they made this ruling, which would be just, more interesting to see, and how, based on the rulebook they have written, they came to this conclusion. Maybe we'll get that in future FAQ. But for now, that is the end of this one. But I do have a few more things that I kind of wish they had answered. I do think these things were, have also been brought up well in advance of this FAQ, and so maybe we might see them in like this thing says, some questions might require a more in-depth answer, so we might see them in different FAQs in the future. But I'll bring it up right now. So here's a little list of questions that I have found across the internet. Some of these are mine, some of these are other people's. I'm just going to read through them, and hopefully Mantic sees this, and we might get some clarity on some of these issues. Maybe they feel like some of these didn't need clarifying, so they didn't bother responding because they've only got limited time. But like I said, I do feel like some of these do need to be addressed. So I'm not necessarily going to go to the rulebook and bring up every single instance of this, but I'll start at the first one. What do you do when a model has more than 2 friendly models in it due to knockback, specifically placing 3 models in the same cube? So I'll just read exactly what I've already written, because I've kind of written as a script. So it was kind of answered in the Mantic errata in a roundabout way. They mentioned the scatter rule. However, the knockback rule is a separate rule that operates differently and has no such similar restrictions. If they implying the 2 rules share restrictions, the book makes no mention of this, other than the Mantic FAQ implying it. So as I said, in both the first half of this video and right now, the FAQ implies that they're the same, but the rule book does not. Maybe I'm just splitting hairs, I don't know, but there we go. Does evade trigger during a grenade/explosive action? So grenades and explosives target cubes. Evade triggers when a model is a subject of a shoot action, as per what's written in the rulebook. Once again, you can kind of check it yourself. The shoot action of a grenade/explosive is the action of throwing the grenade. The resulting explosion is separate to this action altogether. Two possible outcomes may be: 1. An attack with an implosion weapon, which wouldn't pin and so allow free movement, i.e. evade. Or 2. Or a grenade explosive throw that misses its target cube. So you've targeted the cube with the elite, but you've missed. Does that still make the elite the subject of a shoot action? The specifics of what the word subject means, and maybe better terminology may be needed for this instance. I do feel like it's a bit vague about whether or not evade would trigger during those, because those weapons don't necessarily target models, so they don't target elites, and since the elites aren't targeted, are they subjects of shoot actions? Who knows? I'd like a FAQ, please. Do lunge attacks benefit from additional melee keywords such as smash, or additional ranged attack keywords such as rate of fire? So exactly as the question's written, they may, this is just future-proofing. They might bring out a model that's a brute that has smash 1 as a model ability rather than tied to a specific weapon, meaning any melee weapon that brute would pick up would benefit from smash 1. So if that brute goes on to pick up, say, an energy sword or a gravity hammer, it has an inbuilt smash 1. So when they go to lunge, does that lunge benefit from smash 1? Because it's a range test, but smash 1 is a melee ability. I don't know. I'd like a clarifier, please. Does life support keyword also regen a model's shields? The keyword specifies return it to an undamaged state. So the use of term undamaged state is ambiguous. A model has shields that get damaged from attacks. So because the shields get damaged from attacks, and the keyword says return the model to an undamaged state, does that undamaged state also include the NG shields? I don't know. In the game, I'm pretty sure the med packs do regenerate your shields. So it'd be interesting to see what they come up with. Any chance of renaming of the active camouflage keyword and the active camouflage item to be more distinct from each other? So you can check the rulebook, but if you read it, you actually see that there's a keyword called active camouflage, and then there's an item called active camouflage. And I do feel like they could have, just possibly renamed the active camouflage keyword to something that was less confusing for people. Just in casual conversation, if you're playing a game, you're like, oh, that one has active camo, that one has active camo. Then they're like, oh, which active camo does that one specifically have? Might just get a bit confusing for people, especially as more models are brought in that do have these keywords. So reduce player confusion. The keyword active camouflage could be renamed to something like reactive armor, and that way it wouldn't be confusing with active camo. I was also toying with a term like stealth coding or something, but there is already a keyword called stealth, so just avoid that altogether and just call it reactive armor. Similar to how the spy armor is described in the books, or SPI armor. Do explosive keyword weapons scatter through walls or an unsuccessful range test? Grenades don't, as in the grenades bounce off walls. So the explosive keyword simply states, will affect whichever cube the roll indicates. So for a failed missed shot with an explosive weapon, when you roll the scatter to see where that missed shot goes, and it scatters through a wall, does the explosive attack, I guess, penetrate through the wall and hit the cube that is indicated? This may be, an intentional choice on Mantic's part, but just the way you read it and the way it interacts with grenade, it just doesn't make clear what the intention is. So if you're going rules as intended, I'm not sure what they are intending. So the next one is similar to this. So does blast wall keyword affect models on the opposite side of walls? So once again, probably yes, same as above. This may be intentional, though it's not easily understood. It might be rules as written, but I don't know if it's rules as intended. It might be intended, but it's just not clear enough. If an enemy and a friendly model both scatter into the same cube and both have stoic, so don't get pinned, does that trigger a free assault? Or if one has stoic and one doesn't, but they both scatter into the same cube, what happens? So the book does actually attempt to cover this. If you go into, I believe, the scatter rod. In fact, I will bring this one up. We'll see where I got it from. Yeah, so right here at this last kind of line in the scatter keyword. So if a model's movement would trigger the movement of other models, resolve the consequences of each movement, e.g. falling, and then resolve any assault triggered by moving into a cube with an enemy only if they are still in the same cube. If both models in an assault move into the cube during the movement action, an unusual circumstance, then both models must fight and both receive the +1 die modifier for moving into this cube. So there's immediately a few issues with this. So there are two issues right now. It says both receive the +1 fight die modifier for moving into the cube in this action. But let's go up to the assault keywords. So assault says you get +2 dice for moving into the cube during an assault action. So that's the first issue. So I think this is just kind of being a, copy paste issue that Mantic just need to update in a future release or whatever. And it's not really that big of an issue. But the second issue is it doesn't cover what happens if 2 enemy and 1 friendly model all end up in the same cube and all don't get pinned, as unlikely, although possible, that would be. As written, they would all get the fight, but assaults only account for 1v1s. So there's actually, like I said, 2 enemies, 1 friendly. How do you resolve this? Do both enemies fight at once, and then your 1 friendly model attacks one of them? Because the game only accounts for 1v1 melees. The second outcome would be your 1 friendly model attacks, and their 1 enemy model attacks. Once that's resolved, and your model might still be alive, their remaining enemy model then gets to fight again, and your model just gets to save as normal, because it's already fought, or I don't know. Another little issue is it says both have to fight, which doesn't really line up with the way assault is worded, because assault says fight test wins. The difference in successes between the target model's survive test and the attacking model's fight test is the number of hits taken by the target. So if both models fight and neither model survives, when you come to this step, they both see that the number of survive test successes was 0, so they both do, I don't know, like 5 hits to each other. So it's just pure damage, no saves for this kind of instance. Like I said, it is unlikely, but it isn't impossible. So I just like to future-proof, and let's just clear it up right now. Can a model with the medic keyword heal itself? So once again, I'm actually going to go to the medic keyword right now, just so we can all read it together as a big, happy group. There it is. It's a very small one, so it's hard to find. So the medic keyword says, this model may perform an auxiliary action to remove 1 wound marker from a friendly model in the same cube. So the issue with this, as I have written it is, the issue here is whether the game recognizes models as in cubes with themselves. At no point does it indicate that the game does so. So more clarity would be nice. I have brought up in the past that the Dead Zone book specifically says that a model with the medic keyword can heal itself, which was very clear. And that's all I want for the Flashpoint book. I just want it clearly written. Yes, the medic can heal itself, or no, the medic cannot heal itself. Because like I said, more clarity is great. This isn't necessarily something I need to address, but might require a big page like the orthogonal movement thing. So I'd also like to add that clearer rules on model placement in regards to scenery to prevent people attempting to peacock models on fences or such. So if you go to the start of the book, right about, I don't know if it's here, positioning in a cube. So all it says is models must be placed upright with the base supporting the weight of the model. That's basically all it says for how you need to place a model in the cube. It must be placed upright, and it must be placed so its base is supporting its weight. That's pretty clear. But what's not clear is with the way it's worded, you can easily just balance a model on, a knife point. It's still straight vertical. It's still supporting its own weight, and as such, it's still fully legal. And I'm just saying, I don't think if I sneeze and models are just gonna avalanche away, that models should be allowed to be placed like that. I think it just needs a bit more clarity. Like, say, a model with 32mm base shouldn't be allowed to be placed on something with smaller than 32mm of area available to it. I'll just read what I wrote. So no leaning models, and no models being propped up by walls to put them in their position. However, you can still easily balance them on a thin structure like a fence. I think it would be best to simply put models may not be placed on the battlefield or scenery smaller than their base widths, but may overhang their base of battlefield or scenery as long as the above restriction is still followed. I.e., a 32mm width-based model may not be placed on scenery smaller than 32mm wide. I feel like that just stops someone placing a model, knife point on an edge, and that'll just fix the issue. And that is just about that for my roundup of the Mantic FAQ for January 3rd. So I'm going to do a follow-up video for this. This is kind of more like an unofficial FAQ in that it doesn't FAQ any issues. It just goes into a bit more things that players might not be easily aware of just because of the way the rules are written, and maybe when you read the rule, you just kind of glance through it. So I'm just going to go into a bit more depth about a few specific interactions just to make sure that everyone can play at the best they can. So watch out for that video. That should come out in a few days. Thanks for sitting here and let me read to you for a little while. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you got any ideas or suggestions, I'd like to hear them. Make sure you do all that YouTube stuff because it really helps me out. So make sure you subscribe, like. I'd like to see your comments. And I'd like to see you next time. So thanks for watching. Goodbye.